I'm very pleased to welcome John Embry here in London. It's an unusual place for both of us, although this is also my second home, and John and I often meet here. John, welcome here to London. It's lovely to see you.
It's a wonderful pleasure to be here, both to see you and to experience London.
Thank you. What's interesting is you don't actually need any introduction because you're well known for many, many years in the gold and silver or precious metals industry. And I think you're one of the wisest men I know in this industry.
Well, that's very kind of you to say that. I mean, it's one of the few advantages of being old. You do learn a lot.
True. But the thing is, experience. I was asked once, what have you learned throughout your life? I said patience, because experience also gives you patience, and especially in this industry, we have seen tremendous swings in prices, and now we have a bubble situation in the world, which we both agree with, but it's taken a lot longer than we expect.
Well, as I think I've said to you in the past, I mean, I think financial innovation, what I call financial innovation, has had a lot to do with this. I mean, the advent of derivatives, the high-frequency trading, algorithms, what have you, have allowed a degree of leverage to be put into the system that's never, ever remotely been approached before.
Yes, and what we've seen now is just unbelievably high debts, massive deficits, a geopolitical situation which is very, very dangerous, financial system which is a big part of it bankrupt. Both of us see gold reacting to all of these risks that we look at. And it already has, of course. We've seen a major increase in the gold price in the last 16 years. Now, I think we both agree that there is a higher risk of inflation or even hyperinflation due to currency collapse. I mean, the currencies are doing very well in their race to the bottom, and they're all down, as we know, 99% in the last 100 years. Now, if you then look at institutions today own 0.5% of world financial assets, have 0.5% in gold or world financial assets, which is a very, very small amount. If you and I are right about inflation or possibly hyperinflation, they will need to increase that 0.5%. Let's say they increase it by 1% to 1.5%. You've probably done the calculation. I mean, that comes to at today's prices about 60,000 tons of gold that they need to buy, which is a third of all the gold ever produced. They're not going to get it, 60,000 tons. I mean, if they get a tenth of that, 6,000 tons, that would be a lot. But they still, if they're going to spend 1% of world financial assets, that's 2.5 trillion. But they probably have to pay 10 times more for the gold.
Well, there's no question that's true. And I mean, that's why I have gone to great lengths to try to emphasize when I talk to people or speak that you must get gold as soon as possible, and silver for that matter. Because if you don't have it, it's going to be almost impossible to get at any price that's remotely close to today's prices. And what you said is very correct. I mean, there's so little money. There's so much money in financial assets that are grotesquely overvalued by any historical measurement that at some point when it comes rushing out of there and tries to get into real things, it's going to be like amazing impact on the prices of real things. And gold and silver being real money, they will be the biggest beneficiaries.
But so, if you look at today's values of financial assets, of course they will come down in our scenario. But anyway, today's value, I mean, that is 1% is, financial assets are roughly, say, 250 trillion, give or take, 10%. So 1% of that, is 2.5 trillion. And there just ain't 2.5 trillion worth of gold available.
Well, you're right, because people talk about the 180,000 tons that have been mined since the beginning of time. But the vast majority of that's in temples and in various places that it's not accessible. So the amount of accessible gold in the world, I'd say, might be 25% at max of all that's mined. And when you put that in the context of the amount of money that's going to want exposure to that, the prices that you can come up with are almost fantastical. Most people look at like they're crazy. But the fact is, I think it has to go there. I mean, when you start talking $10,000, $50,000 gold, whatever you want, it's not gold that's changing in value at all. It's the value of the money it's being denominated in.
No, absolutely right. And on top of the additional demand that we're likely to see, because every institution, every trustee of a pension fund, every insurance company, I mean, they will demand that their portfolios are inflation hedged.
Yep.
And real assets, gold and silver and mining stocks, is one of the few ways to actually achieve that.
See, so many money managers, from my experience, react to price action. Something's going up in price, it's good, I have to have more of it. Something's going down in price, like silver and gold did for the better part of 5 years, that ended at the beginning of this year. It's bad. So nobody felt the need, and we still haven't, except in a very narrow context, most people still don't know what we're talking about. So consequently, what is to come is going to be spectacular. Like I like to say, and I've been following this industry for 45 years, I guess, that I think this might be the single best buying opportunity in history for gold and silver in relation to where the prices could ultimately go. People still talk about $3,500 to $850 in the 70s. And then this most recent run, beginning at the turn of the century, from $250 up to $1,900. I think those were just openers for what is coming soon.
No, I agree with that. And if you add, both fundamentally and technically, I mean, that is really what we're both seeing. The sad thing is that the reason for this happening is probably not just currency collapse, but it's also potentially real problems in the financial system. And it's a question, in my view, if the banking system will survive in the next few years.
Well, I think the banking system will ultimately require a reset.
Yeah.
I mean, there's infinitely too much debt and very little equity.
Yeah.
And then consequently, if what we're talking about comes to pass, I mean, I can't see how the banking system that is currently constituted could possibly survive.
No.
And it's funny because, I have friends that I've grown up with and known all my life who are smart people. But when I get into this subject and they're sort of exposed to banks and everything, they don't want to talk about it. They just want things to go on as they are for as long as they live. Yeah. So this is going to be a major change in attitude when it occurs, and I think it's going to occur sooner rather than later.
The thing is, you have all these stress tests and they pass more or less, except for one bank or two that are questionable. But we don't need to look at the stress tests. We know that they're all fake anyway. All we need to look at is a chart of most of the banks.
Well, they've been performing horribly. I mean, none more so than Deutsche Bank.
Yeah.
Which, when people recognize this is a huge bank, and I mean, it's the pillar of Germany, and it's bankrupt, purely and simply. And I mean, as I say to people, I'm dying to see how the powers that be handle this one.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many, most of the major banks are down in the last, either since 2006 or since 2000, between 75 and 90%. That tells you that, there's only one way to go to zero for many of them.
We're living in a fantasy land in Canada, where I'm from, because our banks are hovering near their all-time highs.
Yeah.
And if you talk to the average Canadian, our banking system is absolutely impeccable.
Yeah.
And it's not. It's interlinked with the entire global banking system, and we just got a bigger shock coming than a lot of the ones that have already started to pay the price.
John, obviously, both your company and my company, we are very much into gold for wealth preservation purposes, physical gold stored outside the banking system. But I mean, you are also, I know Sprott is very much into silver. And of course, I think we both see silver having more potential than gold, certainly in the next few years. I mean, looking at the gold-silver ratio, gold divided by silver, we've seen it now at 83 3 times in the last few years. And it looks like, to me, they turned in February, and we are now going to see that going down to levels that maybe...
historical levels.
Yeah.
I agree. I mean, right now it's hovering in the high 60s.
Yeah.
And I see no problem with when this thing reaches full fruition, gold-silver ratio being down around 10, 15 to 1. And under that scenario, you're getting 4 times as much appreciation in silver as you will get in gold. And gold's going to appreciate a great deal. I call silver poor man's gold. And as the gold price becomes unattainable for many people because it gets so expensive, money will go into the silver market. And the silver market is different because more than half of the silver that comes out of the ground is consumed in industrial uses. When in gold, it's mostly hoarded. So, I mean, when money seeks exposure in the silver market, it's really tiny, and the impact is going to be outsized.
But if you, and of course, the other thing is no government has any stock of silver. As you say, most of the silver is being consumed, so therefore there'll be very little silver available. And if we then go to the ratio that you mentioned, even 15 or 10, I've always said, even in today's money, I think gold will go at least to 10,000 in today's money. And if you then take a ratio of 10 to silver, you're talking about $1,000 silver.
And I mean, it's fantastical to most people. It's been sort of sitting in a range between 5 and 50 for the last 40 years, that it could possibly do anything like that. But again, it gets back to what I said earlier. It's the value of money that's going to change dramatically, and then the demand for silver will just be sort of superimposed on that.
Yeah, and we both been wrong in actually forecasting how long this would take. We've seen the problems for quite a while, but we've been right with the direction and the risk, and they're now increasing exponentially, especially since 2006. But nevertheless, for some reason, nobody's dared to say the emperor is naked. Oh, I think it's getting closer. I mean, have you got in your mind any time frame for the next few, what's going to happen and how other metals will develop? I know it's dangerous.
As I always used to say, I never put a price and a time frame in the same sentence. But no, I think that we're very, very close now. I mean, I think just sort of the decay in the financial system is becoming obvious to anybody that's sort of prepared to look at it. At the same time, the geopolitical situation is deteriorating at an alarming rate. Both of these are extremely beneficial for gold and silver. So I would be shocked if we were sitting here a year from now and we weren't well on the way to what we're talking about. So I'll say within the next 12 months.
Interesting. Yes, I think even this autumn could be troublesome, but we shall.
Well, there's one aspect we should discuss, and that is sort of these valuation of financial assets. And I mean, the powers that be are absolutely frantic to keep them elevated because they sort of the collateral for the debt in the system, but more importantly, they're the bank's assets, they're the pension fund's assets, or the insurance company's assets. And if what we're talking about comes to pass, I mean, the damage that's going to be done to all these various sectors is going to be extreme. And you're going to have a social problem on your hands because, I mean, most people that are living on pensions, they don't have a lot of other income or, assets. And if suddenly the value of their pension is destroyed one way or the other, either through hyperinflation or through a collapse of the assets, I mean, the implications to me are just like, oh my goodness.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. That's my view also. There will not be any pensions. First of all, already today, most people don't have pensions, and the ones who have, they're underfunded, and they're also falsely valued. They're assuming still that they're going to grow at 7-8% when they're not growing at all.
Well, one of the things, it's sort of pay as you go. I mean, the pensions are paying out, but primarily with a lot of the money coming in the front end. And this would mean the underfunding is growing, and there's a finite point in which they aren't going to pay out, or not anywhere close to what they're supposed to.
But talking about these bubble markets that you mentioned, I mean, the biggest one in my mind is of course the bond market, and especially sovereign debt and government bonds. I mean, here you have a situation where governments have increased their borrowings exponentially. They can't afford to pay the interest, so therefore they go to zero interest or negative interest. I still believe that I said already back in December that the U.S. will probably go to negative interest. I don't know. Do you agree with that?
I agree.
Yeah. And here we have money that will never be repaid. Certainly not in anything else but funny money. And still, people are buying these bonds with getting no yield or negative yield, and knowing, well, they should know that they never get the money back. Can you understand how this industry works?
Well, I tell you, I used a sort of an example when I was giving a speech a while ago, and that is, I think in retrospect, this period will be seen much the same light as tulip mania in the Netherlands and the South Sea bubble that originated in France, or the Japanese financial asset inflation and real estate explosion in the 80s, all of which, in retrospect, were seen as utter madness. And they're laughed at today. Well, guess what? I think they're going to be laughing at this era in the
Yes.
not too distant future. This
Yeah.
is insanity.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I believe that this will be written back for 100 years, 200 years, whatever, a long time. This era here, as you say, and it'll be there in history to be remembered.
It's amazing, I was using the analogy, like in technology and in medicine, there's been massive advances, for the betterment of society. Yet in the financial world, it seems that we don't learn anything. We just repeat the same errors, and now we have the wherewithal to repeat them in even bigger manner because of all this leverage we can get into the system with these new tools we have.
It's amazing how so few can control so much, and the masses are even totally unaware that they have debts of 250 trillion plus unfunded liabilities plus derivatives. So you're talking about quadrillions potentially.
I've thought about this a lot. And I mean, the average human being, and that's saying 90% of them anyways, I mean, they're basically just trying to make a living on this earth and, support their families and get through. They don't think about financial matters. They take them as given. So that gives sort of free license to the people who do understand this to do what they want. And what they've done, in my opinion, is made themselves fortunes on paper at this point.
Yeah.
We'll see if they keep it.
Yeah, well, are you not worried about the financial system from the point of view of custodial risk, etc.? Because if the financial system doesn't survive, it'll be a big problem, not just for money in the bank, but even for stocks or bonds in the bank, etc.
I think that, I say this on every occasion I get a chance, that you'd best have your assets, particularly your gold and silver, in a very safe place or even in your own possession hidden. Anything that's in the custodianship of the banking system, in my opinion, is at risk. And you've seen all this bail-in legislation. When I discussed this with my friends in Canada who have total confidence in our banking system, I said, you realize there's bail-in legislation in our books in Canada. They don't even know what I'm talking about.
No.
And then you have to explain a bail-in and they look at you like, what are you talking about?
So we're seeing a lot of dark clouds on the horizon, and it's almost impossible to imagine exactly how this will play out. I think a lot about the end game. Of course, there is no end. It's just a continuation. The world will go on and has throughout history in different forms. If there's not a nuclear war that
Well, that's
kills
the one
everybody.
thing that I don't want to even go there,
No.
because that to me is the worst end.
It's terrible, and you don't want to think about it because then there's nothing you can plan for anyway. But except for that, if we look at, when we talk about the end game of this so far 100-year era, and I don't think it's going to be much longer than 100, maybe it'll be 110 or so, but I think we are seeing the end of it now. How do you see this playing out in the system? Because that's something that...
Well, I think simplest, I don't know how simple it is, but I could see everything some weekend being shut down, and then having a reset, coming out with a new currency system, and sort of gold would have to be involved, because I don't think you basically would have any confidence in currency unless it were backed after this, considering what's going to happen in this currency experiment. But even that, the disruption in that, I don't know how long it would take to sort of get it normalized. I think it would require a reset of the banking system as well. And think about that. That's just almost unfathomable, considering everybody just thinks the system's going to continue to run as it is, as far as the eye can see, and I don't see that as possible.
No, and when you say a reset, I don't believe in a reset, global reset, because if this happens the way we think it will happen, every single country will be under tremendous pressure. Every political party will be under pressure. There'll be change of leaders all the time, presidents, prime ministers, and there'll be financial pressures, political pressures, etc. So I don't see the world being able to get together to solve a global problem, and I don't see Russia or China agreeing with the United States either in a reset. And therefore, I have problems actually seeing an orderly reset in the world.
I don't disagree with that. I'm just quoting other people who sort of believe in Jim Rickards, who's just written a book on the new case for gold. But the fact is that it's going to be disorderly, and I think that is why the Russians and the Chinese have been buying as much physical gold as they can, whereas it seems to be it's being dishoarded from the West. I think this will be seen in the fullness of time as just a major error. So I think our position in the West is weakening noticeably as a result of this. But that, in the end, there still will be enormous disruption everywhere. I mean, for all we know, the Communist Party could be overthrown in China because there's a lot of unrest there.
Exactly. Exactly. Yes, yes. Well, John, we talked about problems everywhere. At the same time, we're here in London right now. London is still prospering, which is, of course, this is always the case at the end of an era, and people continue their daily life. And even if things happen the way we expect, of course, it'll be horrible for a lot of people. And I mean, one of my forecasts is that world population will come down dramatically in coming years. It's gone from 1 to 7 billion in the last 100 years. And it'll come back a few billion because of whatever it is, famine,
pestilence, just
wars
social
or whatever.
deprivation.
Yes, exactly.
War, Well, it's funny. I'm sort of focused on the fact that the world population has tripled in my lifetime.
Yeah.
And I find that utterly unfathomable. And as you say, if it wasn't ever over 1 billion, I don't think, until about 1850.
Yes, exactly.
And now we're pushing somewhere between 7 and 7.5 billion.
Yes, yes.
And then I see all these projections, we're going to have 10 billion and that. I don't think there's a chance of that. I mean, the world is creaking under this load.
Yeah.
So no, all I can say with assurance is we're headed for some times that are going to be very, very trying. And what strikes me as interesting is most people are in denial. They don't want to think about it, and they just hope that this current iteration of our society continues.
Yeah, I agree. The transitional period will be terrible for the world, whether that's 10 years or 50 years or whatever it is, we don't know.
I think it'll be terrible for everybody.
Yeah.
I mean, all
exactly.
strata of society.
And I always say that at the end of the day, okay, money is important, preserving wealth is important. At the end of the day, it's all about your heart and your head and your group of friends and family, because that's what was going to be the most. It'll be worth more than all the gold in the world, let's say, in coming years. And I think people must focus on fact. You can have a good quality of life without having a lot of money, but you need friends and you need family and support around you.
I totally agree. My daughter and her husband have an organic farm west of Winnipeg in Manitoba, and it's in a fairly remote area. It's not that far from Winnipeg. When you drive out there, suddenly there's no population.
Yeah.
I almost envy them because I think cities could be very, very unpleasant in the event of what we're talking about coming to pass.
Yes. John, it's been a great pleasure talking to you. We've covered a lot of different things, and we are going to have a very interesting time in the next few years, you and I, talking about this and trying to figure out what's going to happen in the world. Thanks so much for coming, seeing us here in London, and I hope to see you soon again.
Egon, it was my pleasure. It's always great to chat with you because there's not many people that see it as clearly as you do.
Thank you, John. Thank you very much.